Hey, it's Bobby Cobb with the Presence Posse, and today I'm joined by Posse partner Danielle McMahon. And today we're going to be talking. Hi, Danielle. How are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you doing? It's not morning here though.
Oh, yes. I guess that's my egocentric time reference. I'm so blessed that I get to start my Monday mornings with our podcast. And today we're going to be talking about presence and our relationship with the present moment. And this is something that I've been playing around with for a couple of years. You know, there's an interesting quote that I had in the invitation, and I don't know that I'll necessarily get it exactly right, but it's from Byron Katie, who says that things happen not to us, but rather than for us. And they happen at the right time, for the right reason, and exactly the right emphasis for us to receive it in that moment. And then she goes on to say, you don't have to believe any of that. However, life is just a little bit sweeter if you do. And so we can talk about that a little bit. And I also, one of the things on the last podcast that Fred and I did that we got into a fun little rabbit hole is this idea that I've talked about on several different podcasts of our negative emotions being kind of rumble strips on the highway of life. And the rumble strips, if you're not familiar with that term, are kind of on a lot of highways, particularly one that are out in the middle of nowhere and there may not be a lot of lights. And you may be driving, at kind of alone and in the dark. They'll have these rumble strips built into the asphalt of the highway. So if you drift out of your lane, your car starts to vibrate. It makes an interesting sound, and it is simply designed to get our attention. That's bringing information into our awareness that we're drifting out of our lane. And I'm interested in exploring today, Danielle, kind of just playing around with that as a idea and a way of using it as a pattern interrupt to give us the opportunity to kind of have as an invitation to just step into the present moment. And we can do that by checking to see if we are time traveling, or are we ruminating about past experiences, or are we anticipating future experience? Are we anticipating future experiences? And if we are experiencing future experiences, are we manufacturing a worst case scenario that may happen in the future? Or are we looking forward to some event that we think might be a bit of a lifeline? You know, oftentimes we kind of soldier through life, walking through what is it, the shadow of the valley of death, uh, hoping that the next job, the next relationship, the next new idea, the next whatever may be the things that kind of bring it all into place. So today we'll have an interesting little conversation about the power of the present moment and the power to ground us, as well as noticing when we are feeling some of those negative emotions. And I do the air quotes when I do that because I don't really think any emotions are inherently positive or negative. We make it so with the energy that we bring to it. So, with that as kind of teeing it up, Danielle, what are some initial thoughts? And I apologize that I just jumped right into this topic. I'm kind of excited about it. Please, would you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about how you became a practitioner of presence and some of the really yummy work that you're doing now.
Mm. So, my name is obviously Danielle McMahon. I live in mid Michigan in the US, and I live on a horse farm, and that keeps me very much connected to the physical realm, right? The
Mm.
weather and the seasons and all those sorts of things. But horses have been much more than that in my life. They have sort of been my emotional savior when I get bogged down in what we label a negative emotion. They've brought me back to joy. That they remind me that joy is available, right? And that I have choices, and that how I show up and relate to the present moment has everything to do with how I experience my life. So they've been very important, and I'm trying to find a way to really integrate their wisdom, their collaboration into the peace coaching that I do. And I just kind of made up that title for myself. I'm a personal peace coach,
I like that.
and a people whisperer, because horse whispering is what helped me to understand actually how we help the horse in the process of domestication. And a lot of those things apply to parallel to parable to, and several people are doing this, the journey of the human to embody the spiritual experience, or as is often said the other way around, right? The spirit to embody the human experience.
Yeah.
And as we awaken, it's actually a remembering, yes,
Yes.
that we are connected to all. We're connected to the horses and the dogs and the often animals that are domesticated bring us that sense of peace and sense of connection and unconditional love, and all those things are much more readily available there because there's no other language.
Yeah.
And that's one of my premises, that because you have to relate to them on a level other than language, then you're relating spirit to spirit, you're relating on that energetic kind of level, because that's how we can communicate, and they reflect our emotions very clearly, right? So one of the first things I thought of as you were talking was when I was first taking this online, making myself visible, doing the uncomfortable things that it takes to go from being a horseshoer all my life to being an online coach and to being an
Slightly
in-person
different daily
coach.
routine, I'm guessing.
Yeah, instead of skills, for sure, right? Like, can't use my anvil and my hammer here, that's not working so well. So, I mean, there were plenty of times that I would have liked to put my computer on there and see if I could remold it, but it probably wasn't going to go well. So that was one of the questions I asked, is what are the barriers to you experiencing personal peace in your life? And almost to a person, it was a negative emotion. Right? It's
Hmm.
like, so what we would term negative, it's anger, it's impatience, it's frustration, it's what those sorts of
Anxiety.
anxiety, depression, all those things that we feel uncomfortable in, and that is accurate. I think that we feel uncomfortable in those emotions for whatever reason. We feel much more comfortable in the joyful emotions, but then some of us who have gotten used to those quote unquote negative emotions can't even feel comfortable in joyful emotions. And certainly when I got clean, that was part of what I discovered, is because I'd put a lid on certain emotions, I'd put a lid on all of my emotions. So then when I teach the brain game course, and one of the first pieces is awareness is everything. Like, I was just not aware of it anymore. I was just sort of on this monolithic. So in horse whispering, he calls that playing possum, right?
Hmm.
You're acting like you're okay and everything is fine, because you don't know that it's not really, it's not, but you're not aware of it. So if that's the relationship you have to the present moment or the lack thereof, then it's very difficult to be present. If you have shut down part of your being or parts of your being, then it's very difficult to be present. Does that make sense to you?
That makes total sense. And it's interesting that, when people choose to kind of medicate themselves, whether
Mhm.
it's through drugs or alcohol or gambling or porn or any shopping.
Binging Netflix, yapping, yep, all of
y-
those things.
Yeah, all of those things. We have many habits that begin innocently enough, and going out and shopping's fun, and it's fun to spread a little of our abundance around and accumulate with some new stuff in the right circumstances and in the right context. It's nice to have an adult beverage with friends, and it can kind of act as social lubricant.
Mhm.
But many of us who have had a bad relationship with either certain substances or certain activities or certain habits, very often are using that to like mask being fully alive. Playing possum is that's a very powerful and interesting analogy, and it kind of almost takes some of the fangs out of the idea of fake it until you make it.
Right.
And you know do you have, and I guess for people who are using something to help them escape out of the present moment, because being in the present moment just seems too painful. It starts
Mhm.
off as kind of a interesting thing that sort of invites us in, and then suddenly can become a crutch where we kind of forget how to operate without it. I mean, seems to me. So
Yeah, and
I
I you explain that even thinking can
even
become
thinking,
that, right?
yeah,
Like you can overthink things and you can be addicted to reasoning and all of those things also even more subtly, I think, are a way of avoiding being fully present.
yeah, we're constantly analyzing out in the future in the thinking example, or going back and
Mhm.
renegotiating the past, and looking for lessons and tricks and tactics and techniques there so that we can project them out in the future. And we just rarely stop to notice how we're doing right now. It's like we're going through the motions as an automaton. So one of the things that I've been playing with is with those negative emotions. If anger starts to arise in me, and I've used this example only because it's so familiar to me. I used to have, like, every time I got on a 1-800 number with a technical service or customer service type person, it was a minefield for me personally, because just dialing the number, I'm immediately beginning to play out scenarios. How's this going to go? Is this person going to be an idiot? Are they just going to be reading off the script? Or will they actually know how things are going to go? Are they going to thank me over and over again, or apologize over and over again for thank me for being a customer, or apologize that I'm having a difficult experience? And I would just kind of wind myself up. And that was something that, even before the idea of being a teacher of presence had entered my own awareness, it was just something that if I was an executive in an office and I was losing my temper corner office back there screaming at some poor soul on the other end of a 1-800 number. It didn't look good. It was a bad look. So long ago, I started exploring that. And it really, the thing that started to unpack it for me and to release the grip that that particular unconscious habit pattern had on me, and it was my habit that was unfolding internally. And depending on how it went for the call, the customer service person either had an amazing experience because I was so geared for it to be poorly, and if it went well, I kind of was over the top excited. So I would be like, wow, that's the nicest call I've had in 5 days. Or it could go in line with my mental machinations, and I may end up taking their head off a little bit. And as I started to look at, what is it about that is giving me such angst and anger and is getting me wound up just at the mere idea of it, that's really when I began to explore for the first time the fact that something is happening right now. And I have a feeling on the inside that is happening at the same time. And I always thought, and it always looked like to me, and this seems to be part of our programming, that we have come to misunderstand that our feelings are telling us about our circumstances. So my tendency was to rail against the person who had offended me or angered me or whatever was showing up in the moment. I kind of assumed it was their fault. And it wasn't until I finally just kind of flipped everything around and said, oh, let's look at this from a different perspective and see what happens. And that whole mental model, that construct that I had built in my head just fell apart like a house of cards. It just dropped down because what showed up for me, what was revealed for me, was my anger didn't really have anything to do with that particular person who was being nice and trying to help and apologizing and trying to solve my problem for me. And I'm berating them. It had to do with how I was doing on the inside. So that became an interesting thread to start pulling and start kind of the process for me of self inquiry. Does that kind of resonate with you at all, or do you have a?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me because I kind of knew what the topic was going to be, and I've kind of started out my day with, I have these few things that I need to do, but I'm pretty consistently at this point in my journey having to deal with um, my mother's care on some level. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is get one of her annuities cashed in so we can pay for her rent and pay for her care. And, so I have to go through several steps of that. And it's difficult to reach these people to begin with. And that is part of the frustration is you just can't even seem to get to a person, and you have to wait a long time to get to a person. Right. And then by that time you're like, well, already your patience may be wearing a little thin. Yeah. So I didn't have a particularly bad feeling about this. And I brought to the conversation that this information should have been received so I can proceed with the next step. Well, they got it, but when I had put the date for the power of attorney in there, I put the date that I signed it and not the date that she signed it. It was 5 days difference.
Mm.
I could not accept it. Really? I have to do this all over again. I have to get another notarized signature. I have to go to the library and fax it to you. again and set it back another week. But at least I had called and reached out to them instead of waiting for the letter that they had sent me. Like, it seems like there's more efficient ways to reach me and let me know this needs to be corrected. But it was interesting because by the time that I got off of that and I was biting his head off a little bit by the time I got done with that call, I was like, okay, so I need to just bring this down a notch and not carry this into the rest of my day. So here's the relationship with the present moment. It's not the notary's fault, right? And I
Right.
don't want to take this to the notary who's doing me a service for free at my credit union or anybody else that I'm going to interact with through the rest of this day. So it was already present in my life, right? So the relationship to the present moment, that being a choice that I get to make moment to moment, also was very present in that actual example that you used, as well as moving forward in my day. I know that I don't have to carry that, that I can do some things to let my nervous system come back to rest instead of staying in that sort of fight, flight, gotta
Yeah.
fight through
And
this.
yeah, exactly that energy that we that fight or flight that so many of us are, or not of us necessarily, probably not people that are listening to this call, but so many people out in the world, they move from one fight or flight experience to another. And you know, if you're doing that, I mean, if you're flittering around like a hummingbird from one fire to the next, and feeling busy and accomplishing a lot of stuff and maybe hitting some frustration along the way, many people have no relationship with the present moment. You know, they're constantly planning out, and then you know they'll see a friend and they're like, oh god, I've had a hell of a week, and then they go and replay the entire week and keep that frustration alive. And you know, we're looking for sympathy, but you know, we're time traveling, we're not in the,
Well, yeah, and we're replaying the story.
yeah, and keeping it
And
alive by
from our
replaying it.
perspective and how we were wronged and how they were not who we needed them to be, and so we reinforce that sort of victim survival level mentality, and that is a very prevalent um, challenge for people. I think that
Yeah, it
that
can
they
be.
don't know how to let that go. Right? It's not the present moment. It already happened. It's already done. You
Yeah.
can learn from it if you choose. You can make different choices if you choose, but you always have those choices. And we're not really um, taught or encouraged to take that moment for ourselves and to care for our nervous system and to allow it to come back into a rest repose state before we try to do the next thing, the
Yeah.
next present moment, whatever that entails, whether it's an activity or whether it's an interaction with someone else. Yeah, so those are reasons that the presence posse exists, because we want with all our hearts to help people to understand that this is possible. Presence is possible,
Yeah,
you
there
know,
is another way.
and you can step into it one day at a time, one action at a time, one experience at a time, because I'm pretty experienced at it. I have a pretty extensive toolbox, and still I had to
And
use it
still,
this morning,
yeah,
right? Like we're still on a human journey. We still have this earth walk, and we have triggers and synchronicities and whatever you want to call those experiences that cause emotion to arise within us. And then, as you say, do we blame it on that outer experience, or do we use that as a moment to say, so what can I
do here.
Yeah. What can I
or
do
see here
differently
that I'm not.
or see
Yeah.
differently? Like you use that. You said it was the change of perspective that allowed you to be different. First you had to view it differently. So yeah, if we view life more of a dance than a wrestling match, we're probably better off, I think.
Yeah, that is a more empowering perspective. But I think if we get deep enough into this, um, there's I'm sure you've seen that drawing, and the people that are listening to the show have probably seen it as well. There's that drawing that if you look at it from a certain angle, it looks like an old woman kind of wearing a shawl, and she's got a long chin, and it doesn't really look like she's got any teeth, and she looks like a lady who's lived a lot of her life journey. And if you just stare at that picture for a moment and let your eyes kind of go soft, very often this picture of a young, beautiful woman in a very fanciful hat looking in a completely different direction emerges out of that picture. Do you know the one I'm talking about? Are you
I
familiar with the?
do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's been around long enough that most people will be familiar with that. And there is a school of thought. I would call that the power of positive thinking, and it works. So this is not a dismissal of this as a technique. That if you just look at the world as through the glasses half full type of goggles versus the glasses half empty type of goggles, that you will have a different experience, and that will change things. Just because we can reframe uh, any experience. And the guy who is cutting us off may be rushing to the hospital so he can say goodbye to his mother before she passes away, or may just be a jerk who wants to make the meeting one car sooner. And, he's hop, skipping, and jumping up the line the best he can. And we can play around with that, and it changes things. So that is
Yeah,
a
so the interesting thing to me about that drawing is that once you see it, you can't unsee it,
unsee it. That's
right?
exactly
Like,
right.
you
Yeah.
know that both things are there, and you can go back and forth then, and you can see those things. And part of what we wanna do is not, um yeah, not just fall into we can make circumstances look different. Circumstances are circumstances,
Right.
but
And
it's
they're
our
still the
choice how we
circumstance.
respond
Yeah.
to that circumstance.
Yeah, we tend to look at the circumstances as though it's a cause and an effect. That,
Yeah,
my boss is a jerk, therefore my work life is not nearly as fulfilling as it otherwise could be. And instead, we can look at that, just making the shift to recognizing that's a stimulus, and we're likely to have a response. And that introduces the idea of being responsible, or breaking the word out a little bit and being response able, that we can respond in a different way to the same stimulation, and we can notice that we do that all the time. When I was a madman calling the 1-800 numbers on an all too frequent basis, there were lots of times that I responded very nicely. And I'm quite sure, I would get into nice conversations with some of the people, and I would be so grateful that they were helping. And I would say, God, how long are you doing this? What's your direct line? I need to call you back anytime I have a problem. And they probably got off the call thinking, wow, that's a really nice guy. One stimulus, but the same guy with a different wiring on a different day different internal weather could be a total jerk on the call. My stimulus that I was responding to was the same with the commute. If somebody pulls you
Mm-hmm.
in front of the car, or waiting online at the bank teller, could lead to a conversation that might spark a good friendship or a business opportunity, or exchange a little life hack that we sometimes do with people. Or it could be 15 minutes of frustration thinking, why in the world don't they have more people working at more teller lines? And it can be extremely frustrating, and we can leave in frustration. So there's the way that we look at it, there's the way that we respond. But and the glass half empty, half full, I'm interested in helping people make a bigger switch. And that is to that switch of recognizing that our circumstances are never controlling how we feel on the inside. That always takes priority. That is prime. That happens first on how we're doing, because we're projecting stuff out into the environment that we're making our way through. So if we can use that as an interrupt, that going back to that rumble strips on the highway of life, if we can have things in our life that give us a pause for a cause, other way around, give us a cause to take a pause and just check in to see how are we doing. And that's one thing that I do on the phone now. I talk about those calls all the time. I haven't had a bad one in so long I can barely remember it. And I'll just sit there if I'm waiting on hold or whatever, or if I get put on hold again, which frequently happens as you're making
Mm-hmm.
those calls. That's just an opportunity to go, okay, how you doing? Check in with my breath, check in with my internal experience, and check in with my mental tachometer, my mental RPM, kind of how fast is my mind whipping around thinking about different things. And if I can start to feel myself edging up in terms of anxiousness or any so-called negative emotions, I know I can control that easily and effortlessly through my breath. And I've known that for a long time. When I was having the crazy moments with the call center, I still knew how to control my emotions with my breath. The challenge was I never thought to do it, because I would get so lost in the experience that it was unfolding, that it was almost like watching a movie. That one of those movies that's so engrossing that you get sucked into it, and it's like you're not watching a movie anymore, you're living the movie. It's like you're in the movie. And that's how life can be a lot of times as well. We get so wrapped up that we rarely ever stop to truly ask ourselves, how am I doing? How are you doing right now?
But the way
And
you describe that is one of the ways you can interrupt it. Exactly. I think is to not see yourself as in the movie, but to draw yourself back and see yourself as viewing the movie. And then
yeah,
you don't have that enmeshment, right?
yeah,
With it, so that you can actually take a look at your behavior and choose, is this how who I want to be, is this how I want to feel and how I want to treat other people, and all those things become more possible with that little bit of distance from that, to know that that's one of the possible interrupts. The breath is a possible interrupt. One of the things that's very easy to do is to bring your hands to your heart
mm,
and feel into a different experience of what what you're experiencing, whether it's sadness, whether it's frustration, whether it's, one of those negative emotions, and say, am I okay?
Yeah.
It's a check-in, right? But it's not even having to think through it. I can physically do this without having to change my mentation, and it changes my perspective. So
Yeah.
there's several little interrupts that they are very simple, and people don't necessarily notice that you're doing them, whether it's the breath or the placing your hand on your heart. And they may also ask if you're having a heart attack. I don't know, but um, most times people don't really react or respond. And certainly if you're on the phone, they're not going to see it, but they may feel it,
Yeah. I
and
think they'll
felt the shift
definitely.
in energy that happens there. And so I think the rumble strips was a great analogy, as in with that, those little things, those removing yourself from yourself and saying, huh, is that me? Is that who I want to be? And breathing in the physical touch. All those are great little interrupts, little rumble strips that we can
Yeah. Yeah.
use in our, because that is the thing, is that when you're learning it, it's hard to remember to apply it, right? And those, the more
Yeah.
often
That
you do it, then the
that's the thing, that when you get so tied up in the moment, those, we're always doing the very best we can with whatever is occurring
Mhm,
to us in the moment. But when we get wound up, when our mental tachometer is going crazy, when our own interpersonal RPMs are kind of hitting that red line, stopping to breathe, stopping to pause, stopping to pull out and look at that situation, the likelihood that that's going to occur to you, unless you've been doing some of this type of stuff that we talk about every week as a practice, as we get wound up, it's been my experience, and it seems to be validated, although I've never run any type of study, but just anecdotally talking to a lot of clients, people seem to have the common experience that as their inner state becomes grippier and more turmoil and shaking and rattling, and as we're approaching that fight or flight type of decision that we might have to make, our access to resources just goes way down. And I think, just based on the conditioning that we have had as human beings, the the power through and suck it up and fake it till you make it, and no pain, no gain, and it's not how often you fall down, it's how often you get back up. We've got so many of those axioms that are, in essence, telling us, put your emotions in a box for the time being. Facts don't care about your feelings. Here's what you need to do right now. Just suck it up and do it. And it's like the domestication process of the human beings, which,
mhm,
we do as parents and grandparents and coaches and teachers and everything else. A lot of that training has to do with ignoring your emotions and not being introspective and not diving in. And as our inner experience amps up and we start to approach that fight or flight level, the ability to stop and do some type of mindfulness practice, it's always there, of course, but the likelihood that it's going to pop up as a good option of what should I be doing next, that rarely shows up unless we're practicing some of this stuff,
mhm,
and unless we're using little opportunities that present themselves in life to check in, or interrupting our pattern in some way, just giving us a cause for a pause to check in and go, What's going on? How you doing right now? You good? You ready for this? You got this? And if the answer's no, it just takes a few seconds to do something about it, to change your state. And I want to revisit the dissociation example that you used earlier of stepping out of the movie, not being a character in the movie, but pulling back and watching the scene unfold as the director would. Or, if we use the movie example, as the camera would. And that's actually something that we do in hypnosis a lot. That step, moving from an actor in the play to somebody who's watching the play, is dissociation. And when I do, pretty much anytime I do any work that is tackling a fear or a past issue or a trauma or a phobia, any of those issues, there's always a conversation before we start the trance to say, here's a technique and we practice it and here's how you do it. And we can do it here, uh, on the, you can practice it on the screen. It's interesting on the screen because I have the ability to look just at Danielle and interact as if we're live and in person, or step back and I can see both of us on the
Mhm.
screen, myself doing my funny little finger movements, and you listening there, and just that energy, pulling it out of there, looking at a past trauma through the eyes of the director or the producer is a lot less emotionally charged than it is if you're looking at it first person. And so that shift is really cool. Breathing is an effortless way to change our internal state because it's the only bodily function, or it's the easiest, not the only. It's the easiest of any of our bodily functions to turn over to automatic. We breathe somewhere in the neighborhood of about 18 to 20,000 breaths a day. And the vast majority of those, we never give any thought to them at all. In fact, normally, if we can notice our breathing, that's often a sign that something's not right. We're exerting ourselves too much or we're becoming too anxious as we become aware of our breath. And then, we can easily just say, all right, just take a deep breath and blow it all the way out. Nice, deep cleansing breath. And, people who meditate on a regular basis and use that as their way of getting into the meditation, that creates a new trigger. So, like in myself and the folks that I've taught how to meditate, to like relax our RPMs, to take our foot off the accelerator a little bit, all it requires is just a couple of nice deep cleansing breaths, and you can change your internal state pretty significantly.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was recalling a story that a meditation teacher told one time, and she was saying that as you develop this routine of like putting the tongue to the roof of your mouth and breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, be really careful that you don't do it while you're driving.
Hmm.
Because she had done that and her foot fell off the brake and she hit the person in front of her.
Yeah.
So everything, that's another um, thing that I learned through the process of recovery. All of our character assets taken to an extreme can become a character defect. So in this case, it wasn't so much a character defect as it is, not safe. But you talked about earlier about shopping being a enjoyable activity, but when it becomes to the extreme, then it becomes not.
A problem. Yeah.
The same with the dissociation. You use it as a tool in hypnosis, but in psychiatry or psychology, they often say you've dissociated from this memory so that you never process those
Yeah.
emotions. and that's not a good thing, right? So all of these things have to kind of be taken in moderation, and we're discussing them in the um, box of interrupts, not as a way to avoid, right? Like we also haven't really addressed the negative label of the emotions. So why does it become negative, like judged as negative, to be sad, to be mad, to be, because we don't have the tools to have um, those courageous conversations, right? About places that are emotionally volatile, where people may experience those things and still stay in an empathetic state. Like that's not a tool that we're taught.
Right.
And we aren't encouraged to be those things that could be viewed as weak or like fearful, sad, that somebody else can take advantage of us, right? So there has to be a fairly high level of trust in being human with another human, to be able to process those emotions and not have to judge them.
Wow. Okay, so you brought up something that's so powerful, and it just reminded me. I did an organizational development training a while ago where I became certified to be an organizational development coach. And one of the things that they were teaching were the five key aspects of an enlightened leader, a really effective leader. Like, think of maybe Steve Jobs, somebody that people just want to follow because you just feel like it's something that you want to be to. And one of the key things there is nurturing trust.
Mm.
And in working with executives, that's one of the things that they'll say, "Oh, I've got that down. I'm really, really good at that. My people can trust me. They know that I trust them." And in that particular module of the training, one of the questions that we ask is, or scenarios that we set up, and then a question that we ask is, okay, when we're talking trust here, we're talking about whether or not you have got the level of trust with your employees, your direct reports, t- to where they could come up to you and say, "Boss, I don't get this. I'm totally confused. I just feel like I'm lost here. And to be honest, I'm a little scared." And and then we will ask the managers, is that the type of conversation that you're ever having on a regular basis? And almost universally, the answer's, no. And thank God, because I wouldn't have the first clue of what to do if somebody came up. My patterned response would be, well, suck it up, figure it out, get her done. And, so having that level of trust, or the trust to be able to say, I'm not enough. Actually, I'd love to get your theories on this. I feel like I've got a lot to say, but I'd rather get kind of, why do you think that is, that's happening? Do you think it has anything to do with our human domestication
I
process?
absolutely do. I feel like we're very much functioning out of fear most of the time.
Hmm.
That we are largely conditioned to function from fear, to be afraid of one another, to be afraid of being controlled, being taken advantage of, and the people that are teaching us are the narrators that are trying to do it.
Yeah.
So there it's always an inside job, just like you talked about from the very beginning of this conversation. Like The level of trust is that you have to allow yourself to be afraid, to be sad, to be angry, and to nurture yourself through that. Like it's just part of being human. I don't have to judge myself for having human experiences when I am in a human experience. That doesn't even make sense when you think about it. But as you learn to trust that you will be okay through that, as you develop some level of competence with it, then you can begin to extend it to somebody else. But that requires a certain amount of discernment.
Yeah. And
Because if
grounding.
you actually ask in that situation that you described, so if I'm the manager and somebody comes to me and says that, then my first reaction was, who do we know that has the strengths to help you understand it? Who in our
Mm,
department is good at this and that can help us? If it's not me and it's not you, then where is the person that has this strength? Because if you ask me and I don't have the strength and I'm your boss, then yeah, I'm scared, right? Because you're scared and I don't know how to help you with that. So I'm just going to tell you to figure it out. Well, that's not helpful, correct? Like, if I'm
correct.
just telling you, figure it out, you've come to me with trust. So if I then have the ability to trust myself, then I can help you figure that out. We can find the right person to ask. But my previous to understanding things this way, one of my go-to things was I was very independent. I felt like I had to figure everything out myself. I had to experience it myself. I had to go through it myself. If whatever you were telling me didn't apply to me because you weren't living my life, and that, let me tell you, is a long road to learning.
Yeah.
Right? So what I would do is I would ask for help from somebody that couldn't provide it, and that reinforced my victim identity. Right. So if I develop this trust within myself and then I go to somebody who's been divorced 4 times for marital information, that's probably not going to turn out well for my trust in myself, because I haven't chosen somebody who is successful at what I'm struggling with or challenged by to help me through it. But if I have that level of trust that I can see, okay, this is the actual um, issue, and this is a person I know with that actual strength, and I can start to help myself and I help others because I've developed that level of trust. But that's not, I mean, maybe to an extent in preschool, preschool level, they teach that. But then as education progresses, I think that that is not something that continues to be emphasized.
Yeah. And it's not something that continues to be exercised. And I use the analogy of newborn babies all the time. I think they have the same effect that puppies or dogs have with some people, and I'm sure horses with a lot of people as well. Just when you're in their presence, they're 100% present. And I'm not sure if it's true of horses or not. You can school me on this, but puppies seem to just have unconditioned love for their owner. Even a really mean owner, that dog is going to continue to love that person. And from newborns, they seem hypnotic to me. I'll be walking along with a friend and somebody will come the other way pushing a baby carriage, and we get close to the baby. If the baby even looks up at us and waves or smiles or anything, we're just locked in to that experience, and you want to be around that. And that is unconditioned love.
Yeah, they
They're
don't know not to love themselves.
exact, and they don't understand the concept
No.
of separation. They're just they're seeing
They're loving
this
it all. And
as
we
it
love
is.
them the
Yeah,
same.
it's
And
and
they are
man, this is
100% present.
life and it's beautiful and there's cool taste and cool sounds and cool feelings that when I touch things. And I can remember
Most
as
horses are not that loyal. That is specific to dogs, I think.
okay.
I think cats are not either.
The cats are definitely, yeah, cats are, people say cats are aloof, whereas, dogs kind of seem like they look to us for all of their cues and they seem to not be really looking. They like being part of a pack.
And different
Um, Go ahead.
individuals within all of those species are different, obviously.
Yeah,
You
true.
know? And
Very
we
true.
we begin to know that about a particular breed or whatever. This one
Yeah.
is more loyal, this one's less loyal, this one's more likely to protect you, this one's more likely to just run.
Or bark incessantly.
Right.
I remember when my kids were coming up, there was a moment that I started thinking, and my son particularly, because he was my first, that I was really looking forward to when they could walk and talk, because then I wouldn't have to carry them. They would have a little bit of their own independence. And in my mind, I thought, well, and when they can talk, when they can begin to understand, it'll be nice because I'll be able to reason with them. And I thought reason, communicate with them and express myself. Those were the words that I was using. But going back and revisiting that now is, I kind of have recognized that really what I wanted to be able to do was control them and,
Mhm.
to keep them on verbal cues, to have their moments when they could still go wild and still be a kid and go crazy. But there was a part of me that was hoping I would be able to, snap my fingers and all of a sudden I have two Stepford children perfectly behaved in any scenario. And, that's what the Cub Scout leader wants. That's what the teacher wants. That's what the little league coach wants, or the swim coach, whatever, wants. They want to be able to maintain a certain control. So certain behaviors like daydreaming, what a wonderful gift to be able to sit there and just be lost in thought and begin the manifestation processes with these little droplets of intention. And to be angry or to be frustrated or whatever, those are feelings that we quickly learn through our domestication process are to be avoided. And I think that that gets so ingrained in us that it's hard to ever let go of that. And anger in some places is a um, in fact, when I was working on my anger that I had with those, and it was an ugly, irrational anger, and it was weird that it did not show up anywhere else. I mean, I never acted that way with another person live. I may get frustrated, but I never lost control. And like in going back and exploring that in trance, one time, the hypnotist, I was the client, said, you're going to get the true understanding of the anger. And they snapped their fingers, and this Indian appears out of nowhere that I had never seen before. I've seen a couple of times since, don't have any connection other than there's some familiarity. And the Indian just came up to me in the trance and got real close. He seemed like he was about 14 feet tall and just kind of kneeling down and looking into me and said only this: anger can be a very good teacher, listen, and then disappeared. And I repeated that to the hypnotist, and the hypnotist said, "What do you make of that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know for sure, but the first thing that pops is maybe I haven't been looking at this right." And that began a process, which actually that experience is one of the reasons that I'm here doing this, because it led me on a path to become unconditioned in some of the ways that
Mhm.
I had been domesticated.
Yeah, so
But
those are kind of the bigger interrupts, right? When we are
yeah, yeah,
able to have somebody to help us through something that we, of our own experience and abilities, can't get through, can't figure out, can't get past, right? We can't interrupt it. So often we need help,
yeah. And
and
and sometimes, like today, I kind of feel like the vast majority of the work that I do, and I'll do that in air quotes because it doesn't feel like I'm doing the work. It feels like the client is doing the work. But the work, mostly my clients get their answers. And mostly
absolutely.
today, when they're asking me for advice, I said, I'm happy to tell you what I would do in your circumstances, at least how that's occurring to me right now. But that answer really doesn't matter. what what we want to explore is what is the right action for you? What's the right answer for you? What's the right next step for you in these circumstances based on how you're wiring? And I'm really trying to guide them within so that they're getting their wisdom from their inner guru, not, something external based on what I've read or what I've lived or what another client said that worked
Yeah,
for
and
them.
sometimes those things can be hugely impactful, but it's always important, I think, to emphasize that to people that you have the answers,
Yeah.
but you may need help getting to them. You may need help changing your perspective so that you can see them. They're still within you, they're still there. But yeah, that we have so much unlearning to do that.
I the shortest coaching call I've ever had, I was a client. I was the client and I was working with my coach. And I called up and gave a 2 sentence explanation of where I was stuck at the moment. And my coach said, "Uh-huh. What do you make of that?" And I kind of just knew she does the same sort of stuff that I do. So, I kind of knew where this was going. And it was almost like I was listening to myself in the process. And I kind of worked through it. And she did give me just a little bit of a nudge because it had something to do. I had a reluctance of taking people's credit card over the phone. I didn't want to take that information because that's my own wiring. I'm very nervous. I've had my identity stolen twice,
Mhm.
and it's a pain. So
Mhm.
I don't like giving my credit card information out to people. And I was projecting my own fear. And in working with her, her nudge that she gave me was simply to ask, "Are you projecting?" And I started to think about it, and we talked for a little while, and I confessed that I do have this own reluctancy when to hand out my own credit card. And she goes, "Well, I don't. And how many of the clients are asking you, how do I pay you, and having you send the link?" And I said, "Well, that happens a lot." And she goes, "Okay, well, then you recognize that you are." And she kind of paused for a second. And I said, "I'm creating the own scenario that I'm now bitching about." And she goes, "You see it?" And I go, yeah, I got it now.
Yeah.
And she goes, and you know what you can do, right? And and the answer was, and this is kind of our little shorthand, just let that shit go. You know, that
Right.
whole meditation tape, just let that shit go. And I did, and the whole call lasted maybe about 3 minutes. And the last thing that she said to me on that call was, "Are we good?" And I'm like, "We're good." She's like, love ya. And boom, we're off to the races from them. And so there are times, and it is, we're talking a lot about going within and doing all of that stuff. There are times that it is very helpful if we're stuck in some sort of myopic view of the world and we cannot see any other options, reaching out to somebody like any of the posse members, or could be a friend, or a pastor, or a relative, or a bartender, whoever, just sometimes just saying this stuff out loud and can serve as the catalyst to help you look at things from
Right.
a,
And even journaling.
yeah, even journaling, yeah, because
Just
we're accessing,
write it out. You get it out of your head. It looks different on paper.
yeah, sure does. We're
Mhm.
accessing a different part of our brain. It is
Mhm.
actually, it's going to be different because it's coming from the center of our brain that controls the writing, and the one that controls the speaking are different parts.
Right.
So yeah, awesome. Well, Danielle, I know you are awesome at this type of stuff. So if somebody wanted to use you as a self-inquiry catalyst, or deepen the exploration, or come play with the ponies in one of the retreats that you occasionally do, what's the easiest way for them to get in contact with you?
If you are my friend on Facebook, just message me. If you are not, then request me because I might not see the message request. But that is the easiest way to get a hold of me is through that. You can certainly leave a comment here, and if I don't see it, one of the other posse members will, and we will reach back out to you and see if any one of us can help you.
Yeah, awesome. And we do have a group that houses all of our videos. We've got them on Facebook, we've got them on YouTube, and we now have begun releasing these this year. I have on my list of things to do today, Danielle, counting where we are, because I think we have entered the 90s, which means
Excellent.
our 100th podcast will be coming up in the not too distant future. So I'll see if I can get an exact date for that, for
And this
us.
must be somewhere close to our 2 years of presence,
Yeah,
possibly.
yeah. And this is more or less, yeah. But we've skipped a couple, for
Here
holidays
and
and
there.
things. So uh, we've been doing it for 104 weeks, but I think we've only banked about 95 or 96 of them because of the
Okay.
holidays along the way and everything. Well, on behalf of all of our Presence Posse members, Danielle and I, as well as our four other members, Malcolm Free, Miriam Siegel, Jan Hart, and Fred Blum, we appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to the show. We do have a group on the Presence Podcast, on the Presence Podcast group on Facebook. And hopefully someday there'll be some rather robust conversations. It's kind of quiet now. It's just a good place to find out what we're doing next. But want to thank you for tuning in, and we will see you same bat time, same bat channel next week as the Presence Posse tackles yet another subject. Danielle, thanks so much for making some time today. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for hosting, Bobby. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Ciao for now, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.